a simple request for an earned upgrade, a condescending smile from a flight attendant, a swift, dismissive judgment based on the color of a man's skin and the casual clothes on his back. She saw a nobody. She thought he was just another passenger she could push aside without a second thought, giving his rightful seat to someone she deemed more suitable. What she didn't know was that the quiet, weary man in the simple grey hoodie held the fate of her career and a multi-hundred-million-dollar deal for her airline in the palm of his hand. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about the moment a quiet man decided enough was enough and the shocking power he was about to unleash. The air in Terminal 4 of JFK was a familiar soup of hurried announcements, the squeal of luggage wheels, and the low hum of thousands of intersecting lives. For Xavier Stone, it was just noise. He sat hunched over a lukewarm coffee, the paper cup doing little to warm his hands. He was a man built of quiet contradictions. His 6'3" frame was folded into a small airport chair, and though his shoulders were broad enough to command a boardroom, they were slumped with a weariness that had nothing to do with the early hour. He wore a plain, dark grey hoodie made of a cashmere blend that cost more than the average suit worn in designer sneakers and simple black athletic pants. To the world, he was an anonymous traveler, another face in the river of humanity flowing towards gates and destinations. He preferred it that way. Anonymity was a luxury that his usual life rarely afforded him. His phone buzzed, a message from his executive assistant Chloe. All docs for the Ethelred merger are in the secure folder. Board is prepped for your virtual sign-off Monday. Safe flight X. He typed a quick reply. Thanks, C. Keep me updated. He wasn't flying to San Francisco for the Ethelred merger, a deal that would make his company, Etheria Innovations, the undisputed king of cloud logistics. He was flying to see Daniel Patterson, the man who had been a ghost in his life for the past 10 years, and a titan for the 20 before that. Daniel, his mentor, his first boss, the man who had seen a spark in a 19-year-old kid from the Bronx with a knack for code, and had fanned it into a fire. Now that fire was consuming Daniel himself, pancreatic cancer, the doctors said. A few weeks, maybe a month. The flight transcontinental air flight 2R17 was a necessary evil. 6 hours trapped in a metal tube, suspended between a life he had built and a life that was fading away. He checked the airline's app on his phone. He was booked in premium economy seat 14B. His status chairman's preferred platinum was the highest possible tier, a result of the millions Etheria spent with the airline annually. The app showed the cabin layout. First-class seat 2A was still miraculously empty, an oasis of legroom and quiet that seemed impossibly tempting today. He'd try for an upgrade at the gate. With his status, it should have been a formality. At the gate, the agent, a cheerful young man named Paul, scanned his boarding pass. "Welcome, Mr. Stone. We'll be starting boarding with first class in just a few minutes." "Thank you," Xavier said, his voice a low, calm baritone. "I noticed on the app that seat 2A is still open. I'd like to put in for a complimentary upgrade with my status." Paul typed into his computer. "Ah, yes, sir. I see it. And I see your status. You're number 1 on the list by a mile. It should clear automatically, but let me just put a note in here to make sure it goes through. It's yours." "I appreciate that," Xavier said, a small measure of relief washing over him. The extra space would give him room to think, to prepare himself for seeing Daniel as a shadow of the giant he remembered. He waited. First class was called, then the diamond and platinum tiers. As he approached the podium again, a new agent was there, a severe-looking woman in her late 40s, with blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin around her eyes. Her name tag read Brenda. Paul was gone. Xavier presented his pass, "Hi, I'm Xavier Stone. Paul was just processing my upgrade to 2A. Brenda gave his boarding pass a cursory glance, then let her eyes travel from his worn sneakers up to his hoodie and finally to his face. A flicker of something disdain, perhaps, or simple disbelief crossed her features before being replaced by a professionally bland smile. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice dripping with synthetic sweetness. "I'm not seeing any upgrade processed for this seat. The gate upgrade window has closed. You'll have to board with your assigned seat." "Your colleague Paul just said it was being processed," Xavier countered, keeping his voice even. "He confirmed I was first on the list and the seat was available." "Paul is new," Brenda said dismissively, as if that explained everything. "Sometimes the system doesn't update properly. We have to prioritize based on a number of factors. I'm sure you understand." She turned to the next passenger, a man in a crisp business suit. "Welcome aboard, sir." Xavier stood his ground for a moment, the injustice of it a small, sharp sting. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about the look, the dismissal, the unspoken assumption that he couldn't possibly be the person deserving of that upgrade. He had seen that look 1,000 times in his life. He took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and decided to let it go. For now, a fight at the gate wasn't worth the energy. Daniel was waiting. He stepped aside and proceeded down the jet bridge, the ghost of his mentor, weighing far more heavily on his mind than the petty slight of a gate agent. The cabin of the Airbus A330 was a study in controlled chaos. Passengers jostled for overhead bin, spaceflight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, and the air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and jet fuel. Xavier found his seat 14B, an aisle in the premium economy section. It was comfortable enough, but his knees were still closer to the seat in front of him than he'd like. He settled in, pulling out a well-worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Daniel had given it to him when he was 21, telling him, "Business is war, kid. This is your field manual." He'd read it so many times the pages were soft as cloth. As the last of the passengers trickled in, he saw her. Brenda, the gate agent, was not a gate agent at all. She was the purser, the lead flight attendant, her uniform jacket now adorned with a pin that signified her seniority. She moved through the aisles with an air of ownership. Her smile fixed her eyes, scanning everything. Their gazes met for a brief second. There was no recognition in hers, only the same blank, evaluative glance she gave every passenger. He was just part of the inventory. The boarding door was about to close when a man in a slightly rumpled suit, talking loudly on his phone, hurried down the aisle. Yeah, the Henderson account is a lock. I'll have the paperwork by EOD. Tell them my flight was delayed." He looked at his boarding pass, then at the seat next to Xavier. "Seat 14A," he grunted as he shoved a heavy briefcase under the seat. Just as the announcement for final door closure began, Brenda's voice cut through the cabin's PA system. "Paging passenger. Peterson, Mr. David Peterson. Please see the purser at the front of the aircraft." The man in 14A, Mr. Peterson looked up in surprise. "That's me." He squeezed his way back into the aisle and headed toward the front. Xavier watched a knot of suspicion tightening in his gut. He could see Brenda speaking to Mr. Peterson in the galley, her expression now warm and accommodating. She gestured towards the first-class cabin. Mr. Peterson's face broke into a wide, triumphant grin. He returned a moment later to retrieve his briefcase. "Looks like it's my lucky day," he said to no one in particular, but loud enough for the whole section to hear. "Operational upgrade." He winked, then disappeared through the curtain into first class. Xavier stared at the curtain. So the seat hadn't been unavailable. It hadn't been locked by the system. It had been held for someone Brenda deemed more worthy, someone who looked the part, someone like David Peterson, a mid-level sales manager whose airline status was 2 tiers below his own. Xavier knew this because he could see the silver tag on Peterson's briefcase, a perk for the airline's lowest elite tier. The junior flight attendant, a young man named Kevin with kind eyes and a nervous energy, was working their aisle. As he passed, Xavier flagged him down. "Excuse me," Xavier said softly, not wanting to make a scene. "I have a quick question." "Of course, sir. How can I help?" Kevin said, crouching slightly to be at eye level. "I had inquired about an upgrade to seat 2A at the gate. My status is Chairman's Preferred, Platinum. I was told the seat was unavailable for a gate upgrade. I just saw Mr. Peterson from 14A moved into that exact seat. Could you perhaps clarify the airline's policy on this?" Kevin's face fell. He glanced nervously toward the front galley where Brenda was directing her crew. He lowered his voice. "Sir, I'm not sure. Brenda handles the upgrade list. She said the system assigned it." "The system," Xavier repeated, his voice flat. He could see the lie caught in the young man's throat. Kevin knew what had happened. He knew it was wrong. "I'm sorry, sir," Kevin mumbled, his eyes pleading. "Maybe there was a last-minute change. Once we're in the air, I can bring you a complimentary drink or snack from the first-class selection." It was a small, kind gesture, a peace offering. Xavier recognized it for what it was, an apology on behalf of his superior. "A bottle of water would be great. Thank you, Kevin," Xavier said, giving the young man a nod of dismissal. Kevin scurried away, clearly relieved to escape the conversation. Xavier leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. The anger was there, a low, simmering coal, but beneath it was a profound sense of exhaustion. This was the game he still had to play even now. CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, a titan in his industry, and he was still being judged by the cover, still being told in 1,000 subtle ways that he didn't belong. He thought of Daniel, a man who had never judged him by anything but the quality of his mind and the content of his character. Daniel, who was dying. The pettiness of this situation felt both monumental and insignificant at the same time. He could make a scene. He could demand to see the captain. He could pull out his phone and fire off an email that would have vice presidents scrambling before they even landed. But not yet. Brenda had made a calculated decision based on prejudice. Now he would make his own calculated decision based on strategy. He would let the flight continue. He would observe. He would gather his data. And when the time was right, he would respond. Not with anger, but with consequence. The plane rumbled down the runway, a powerful machine of steel and thrust, and lifted into the sky. Inside, a quiet, cold war had just begun. The flight droned on, the cabin lights were dimmed, and most passengers were lost in movies or sleep. Kevin had brought Xavier a large bottle of Fiji water and a small plate of the warm nuts served in first class, delivering them with a quiet, almost conspiratorial nod. Xavier had spent the first 2 hours of the flight not reading his book, but composing a single meticulously worded email on his phone. He documented the timeline, the names, the sequence of events, and the blatant discrepancy in policy. He did not editorialize or complain. He simply stated the facts. He saved it as a draft. Around the 3rd hour, Brenda made her way down the aisle, performing a cursory check of the cabin. She moved with a practiced grace, her smile a mask of professional hospitality. As she passed Xavier's row, he spoke, his voice calm, but carrying an authority that made her stop. "Excuse me, Brenda." She turned her smile, faltering for a fraction of a second, as she tried to place him. "Yes, sir. Can I get you something? I'd like your full name and employee number, please." Xavier said, his tone perfectly level. It was not a request. Brenda's back stiffened. The mask snapped back into place this time with a harder edge. "I'm sorry, sir, but why would you need that? I have some feedback for the airline regarding the service on this flight," he replied, his eyes unwavering. "I believe in being specific." Her face hardened. This was a complaint. A disgruntled passenger in premium economy? She'd handled hundreds. "Sir, if you have a complaint, you can fill out the form on the airline's website after we land." She made a move to continue down the aisle. "I'm sure I'll do that as well," Xavier said, stopping her again. "But I'm asking you now, your name and employee number." A few nearby passengers were starting to notice the exchange. Brenda's cheeks flushed a pale pink. "Sir, I'm not comfortable providing my personal information. It's not personal information, it's your professional identification. It's for accountability." Xavier stated the last word, hanging in the air with a distinct weight. He saw Kevin hovering nervously in the rear galley, watching the scene unfold. Brenda crossed her arms, a classic defensive posture. "My name is Brenda Jenkins. That's all you need to know. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other passengers to attend to." "I see," Xavier said slowly. He took a slow breath, then reached into the pocket of his hoodie. He pulled out not a phone, not a credit card, but a slim, surprisingly heavy wallet made of dark cordovan leather. He didn't open it to a driver's license or a platinum Amex. He flipped it open to a special compartment. Inside, nestled against the rich leather, was a badge. It wasn't a police badge or a government ID. It was made of a solid piece of brushed titanium, cool and metallic. In the center, laser-etched in a deep, commanding blue, was the sleek, stylized A logo of Etheria Innovations. Below the logo were 4 lines of text. Xavier Stone, Chief Executive Officer, Etheria Innovations, TI1 Platinum Partner. Brenda squinted her brain, struggling to process what she was seeing. It looked official, important. But the name didn't ring a bell. I don't know what that is, sir." Xavier's voice dropped, becoming quieter, yet somehow more resonant in the hushed cabin. "Let me explain it to you, Brenda. Etheria Innovations. My company just signed a $700 million contract with Transcontinental Air. We are rebuilding your entire digital infrastructure. The booking system, the mobile app, the back-end, logistics, all of it. This coming Monday, we are also jointly announcing the TC1 program, a new corporate partnership tier. My badge designates me as the inaugural and chief partner." He paused, letting the words sink in. Brenda's mouth had gone dry. Her professional smile had completely vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of dawning horror. "This badge," Xavier continued, tapping a polished fingernail against the titanium, "comes with certain non-negotiable courtesies contractually guaranteed by your airline's executive board. The first and most basic of which is priority, no questions, asked upgrades to any available premium seat on any transcontinental flight, regardless of booking class or time of request. It's in Section 7, Subparagraph B of the Partnership Agreement. I know this because I helped write it." The cabin was silent, save for the hum of the engines. The passenger across the aisle was staring wide-eyed. In the front of the cabin, Mr. Peterson, who had leaned out to see what the commotion was suddenly looked like, he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Kevin from the rear galley looked as if he had seen a ghost. Xavier held Brenda's terrified gaze. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He was something far worse. He was clinical. He was a CEO identifying a critical system failure. "You didn't just deny me an upgrade I was entitled to, Brenda," he said, his voice a blade of cold steel. "You gave it to a lower-tier passenger based on your own personal and deeply flawed judgment. You looked at my clothes and the color of my skin. and you made a decision. A decision that could be viewed as a breach of a multi-million-dollar corporate contract. He slowly closed the wallet and slipped it back into his pocket. So I'm going to ask you one more time, what is your employee number? Because my feedback for your CEO, Robert Chen, who I am meeting for dinner on Tuesday, by the way, is going to be very, very specific. Brenda Jenkins stood frozen in the aisle of Flight 217 at 35,000 feet and felt the bottom drop out of her world. The silence that followed Xavier's revelation was heavier than the air pressure in the cabin. It was a dense, suffocating blanket of shock and realization. Brenda's face had cycled through a spectrum of colors from flushed pink to a waxy, bloodless white. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish gasping for air. The name Robert Chen had landed like a physical blow. Every employee knew that name. He was the new formidable CEO of Transcontinental, brought in to save the struggling airline. My number, she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper that was nothing like her earlier crisp authority. It's 73491. Thank you, Brenda, Xavier said, his tone devoid of any emotion. He picked up his book, as if the conversation was over a clear and final dismissal. But the conversation was far from over. The shockwave was spreading. Up in seat 2A, David Peterson was frantically trying to become invisible. He had his reading light off and was pretending to be asleep, his face turned towards the window. The incident had transformed his lucky day into a stage for his own public humiliation. Brenda stumbled back towards the galley, her composure utterly shattered. She practically fell into the jump seat, her hands trembling. Kevin approached her cautiously. Brenda, are you okay? Did you hear him? She whispered, her eyes wide with panic. Etheria Innovations, Robert Chen. Oh my God, what have I done? Kevin didn't answer. He simply handed her a cup of water, his expression a mixture of pity and a grim, unspoken affirmation. You did this. The next 2 hours of the flight were the longest of Brenda Jenkins's life. The atmosphere had been irrevocably altered. Wordlessly, the flight crew tried to manage the fallout. Kevin, looking terrified but resolute, approached Xavier a few minutes later. Mr. Stone, he said, his voice low. Captain Miller has been notified. He would like to speak with you at your convenience. Also, is there anything at all I can get for you from the first-class cabin? A meal, champagne. No thank you, Kevin, Xavier said, looking up from his book. He gave the young man a small, reassuring smile. You've been very professional. I appreciate that. Please tell the captain I'm fine to speak with him whenever he deems it appropriate. The offer of first-class amenities was a tacit admission of guilt, a desperate attempt to put the genie back in the bottle. But the bottle had been shattered. It was never about the champagne or the wider seat. It was about the principle. A short while later, Captain Robert Miller emerged from the cockpit. He was a tall man in his 50s, with graying temples and a calm, commanding presence. He didn't speak to Brenda in the galley but walked directly to seat 14B. He ignored the curious stares of the other passengers. Mr. Stone, he said, extending a hand. I'm Captain Miller. I want to apologize unreservedly on behalf of my crew and this airline. Xavier shook his hand. Captain, thank you for coming. I was made aware of the situation by my purser. Captain Miller continued, his voice, a low rumble meant only for Xavier. I have also been communicating with our ground control and corporate headquarters. They are fully apprised of the events. Let me be clear, what happened is unacceptable. It is not in line with our policies, our values, or our contractual obligations. This will be handled with the utmost seriousness, I assure you. I appreciate that, Captain, Xavier replied. My only concern now is landing safely and getting to my destination. This can be dealt with on the ground." "Of course." The captain nodded, his respect for Xavier's calm demeanor evident. "A corporate liaison will be meeting you at the jet bridge in San Francisco to escort you and handle whatever you need. Again, sir, my profound apologies." As the captain walked back to the cockpit, he cast one long, unreadable look at Brenda Jenkins. It was a look that held the weight of a judge's gavel. For the remainder of the flight, Brenda was a ghost. She performed her duties mechanically, her face a pale, emotionless mask. The other flight attendants gave her a wide berth, whispering in the galleys. The social fabric of the crew had been torn apart. She was isolated, a pariah in her own domain. She tried to catch Xavier's eye once, perhaps to offer another more personal apology, but he was engrossed in his book, or at least pretending to be. He had rendered his verdict, and now he was simply waiting for the sentence to be carried out. The descent into San Francisco began, the city lights a glittering carpet below. As the plane taxied to the gate, the usual cheerful, "Thank you for flying with us." Announcements had a strained, somber quality. When the seatbelt sign switched off, Xavier remained seated, allowing the other passengers to deplane. Brenda stood near the exit, her posture rigid, her face ashen. Her job was to smile and wish every passenger a good day. Every "thank you" she uttered sounded like a plea. When Xavier finally approached, she flinched. "Mr. Stone," she began, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake." Xavier paused and looked at her, looked at her for the first time since the reveal. He saw not a monster, but a frightened, flawed woman who had been caught by the consequences of her own deep-seated biases. "Mistakes can be forgiven, Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Prejudice cannot. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice, and choices have consequences." He didn't wait for a reply. He walked out of the aircraft and onto the jet bridge. Waiting for him, just as the captain had promised, was a woman in a sharp corporate suit holding a tablet with his name on it. She introduced herself as Elena Vance, Director of Customer Relations. "Mr. Stone," she said, with practiced sincerity. "Welcome to San Francisco. Please allow me to handle your luggage and transportation. We have a car waiting." As Eleanor led him away from the gate, Xavier glanced back. Through the window, he could see Brenda, still standing at the door of the plane, watching him go, her face a perfect portrait of despair. The descent was over. The impact was yet to come. 3 days later, Brenda Jenkins walked through the glass doors of Transcontinental Air's corporate headquarters near SFO. The building was a monument to modern aviation, with a soaring atrium and a massive model of their flagship jetliner suspended from the ceiling. On any other day, it would have filled her with a sense of pride. Today it felt like walking into a mausoleum. She had been placed on administrative leave the moment Flight 217 landed. The email waiting for her when she switched on her phone had been cold and brief report to the office of Cynthia Davies, VP of In-Flight Experience, Wednesday at 10:00 a.m. sharp. Do not report for any scheduled flights. Now riding the silent express elevator to the 18th floor, the executive wing, she rehearsed her apologies, her justifications. It was a misunderstanding. She was overworked. The passenger was dressed unusually. She thought he might be a security risk. The lies sounded flimsy, even to her own ears. The truth was uglier. She had looked at Xavier Stone and seen someone who didn't fit her mental image of a first-class passenger. She had acted on that ugly impulse, and in doing so had detonated a bomb in the middle of her own life. Cynthia Davies's office was corner suite with a panoramic view of the bay. Davies herself was an impeccably dressed woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She did not smile or offer a handshake. She simply gestured to the leather chair opposite her desk. "Brenda, thank you for coming," she said, her voice as cool and polished as the marble floor. "Please have a seat." Brenda sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We have a problem," Davies began, forgoing any preamble. "A very, very significant problem. I have the captain's report, a formal statement from flight attendant Kevin McDowell, and a detailed summary of the incident from Mr. Stone's corporate liaison. Would you agree that these reports accurately describe the events on Flight 217? "Yes, but," Brenda started, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Cynthia Davies held up a hand, silencing her. "Let me be the judge of that. First, let's establish the facts. You denied a complimentary upgrade to a passenger with the highest possible elite status, correct? I thought the seat was locked for operational. Did you or did you not deny the upgrade?" Davies cut in, her tone sharp. "Yes," Brenda conceded. "And you then gave that exact seat to another passenger with a significantly lower status. Correct, he was dressed professionally. I assumed." "You assumed," Davies repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "You assumed based on his appearance, and you assumed based on Mr. Stone's appearance that he was not entitled to the same. Is that a fair assessment?" Brenda's throat felt tight. I made a judgment call." "You did," Davies agreed, her voice dangerously soft. "You made a judgment call that may have cost this company a $700 million contract partner." Brenda paled. He said that, but I thought he was exaggerating." "He was not." Davies tapped on her tablet, and a series of logos and charts appeared on the large screen on the wall. "Etheria Innovations is our new technology backbone. They are, without exaggeration, our single most important corporate partner. Mr. Stone is not just their CEO. He is a tech visionary. Our own CEO, Robert Chen, has spent the last 6 months personally courting him to win this contract. Mr. Stone was flying to San Francisco for a personal matter, but he was also, in effect, performing an unofficial audit of the premium service we promised him. You, Brenda, were his first and only point of contact with our in-flight service. You were the face of transcontinental air. And you failed, spectacularly." Davies swiped the screen. A new document appeared. It was Brenda's employee file. "I had HR pull your file," Davies said, her eyes scanning the screen. 22 years of service, mostly glowing reviews. You're efficient, you're professional, you're a model purser. But there's a pattern, isn't there? She tapped the screen again. A list of minor passenger complaints appeared, dating back over a decade. May 2012. A complaint from a Dr. Arjun Singh. He claimed you were unnecessarily curt when he asked for assistance with his bag. He was wearing religious headwear. "I don't remember that," Brenda mumbled. September 2015. A complaint from the Williams family. An African-American family of 4. They reported you made them feel unwelcome in the business class cabin. They were letting their children run around. March 2018. A complaint from a Mr. Hernandez, who felt you were dismissive of his request for a drink, serving 3 other white passengers before him. Davies looked up from the tablet, her gaze piercing. Individually, these are minor, easy to dismiss as he said, she said. A passenger having a bad day. But taken together in light of what happened on Flight 217, a very clear and very ugly pattern emerges, Brenda. A pattern of bias. A pattern of you appointing yourself the gatekeeper of premium travel, deciding who belongs and who doesn't based on your own prejudices. The room was silent. The justifications Brenda had prepared crumbled into dust. It was all there in black and white. a history of small slights that culminated in one catastrophic failure of judgment. Transcontinental Air cannot afford that liability, Davies said, her voice now devoid of all warmth. The Etheria Partnership contract has a stringent non-discrimination and service standards clause. Your actions have put us in direct breach of that clause before the ink is even dry. Mr. Stone could have pulled the entire deal. The only reason he didn't is frankly because he appears to be a man of more character than you gave him credit for. Cynthia Davies leaned forward, her hands flat on the desk. Brenda Jenkins, effective immediately. Your employment with Transcontinental Air is terminated. Your credentials will be deactivated, and security will escort you from the building. We will be mailing you the details of your final pay and severance. The words hit Brenda with the force of a physical blow. 22 years. Her entire adult life. Gone. Terminated. She whispered the word, tasting like ash. For one mistake. No. Cynthia Davies set her eyes like chips of ice. For a pattern of behavior that finally caught up with you. This wasn't a mistake. This was a revelation. The hospice was a quiet place, filled with the soft light of the Bay Area and the hushed sounds of gentle care. Daniel Patterson was propped up in his bed, a pale and fragile echo of the booming, barrel-chested man who had once dominated every room he entered. But his eyes, though sunken, still held the familiar intelligent spark that Xavier remembered so well. So, Daniel rasped a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. You brought down the thunder on some poor flight attendant. Xavier, sitting by the bedside, managed a weak smile. It got a little more attention than I expected. News travels fast. He had told Daniel the story the day before, leaving out none of the uncomfortable details. Good, Daniel said, his voice gaining a flicker of its old strength. Power is useless if you don't use it to recalibrate the world now and then. People get comfortable in their little prejudices. They need a shock to the system to remember what's right. I didn't want her fired, Daniel, Xavier confessed, looking out the window at the gardens. I just wanted accountability, for her to understand the impact of that casual dismissal. Sometimes accountability looks like a pink slip-X. Daniel said, his gaze steady. Don't you carry an ounce of guilt for that. You didn't fire her. Her own bigotry, polished over years of practice, fired her. You just held up the mirror. Their conversation was interrupted by a light knock. A nurse entered. Mr. Stone, Ms. Cynthia Davies from Transcontinental Air is here to see you. She says you're expecting her. Xavier nodded. Yes. Send her in. Thank you. Cynthia Davies entered the room, her corporate armor slightly softened by the quiet solemnity of the place. She nodded respectfully to Daniel before turning her attention to Xavier. Mr. Stone, she began. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Cynthia. Please. He gestured to another chair. This is my mentor, Daniel Patterson. A pleasure, Mr. Patterson, she said. She then turned back to Xavier, her expression serious. I'm here to give you an update in person. As of yesterday morning, Brenda Jenkins is no longer an employee of this airline. Furthermore, we have opened a full internal review of our purser training and promotion protocols to identify and address systemic issues of bias. Thank you for letting me know, Xavier said quietly. But that's not the real reason I came, Cynthia continued, pulling a folder from her briefcase. Mr. Chen, our CEO, sends his deepest apologies again. He was horrified. We all were. He wanted me to deliver this personally. She handed the folder to Xavier. Inside was a formal letter of apology, but also a document offering him a personal lifetime, unlimited pass for free first-class travel on any transcontinental flight anywhere in the world. It was a king's ransom in air travel, a golden parachute to smooth over the incident. Xavier looked at the document, then slid it back into the folder and handed it back to Cynthia. "I appreciate the gesture," he said calmly, "but I can't accept this." Cynthia looked surprised. "Mr. Stone, it's the least we can do." "No," Xavier said, leaning forward. "The least you can do is fire one person and hope the problem goes away. I'm not interested in personal perks. I'm interested in systemic change. That was the entire point of my call with Robert Chen yesterday." This was the first twist. Xavier hadn't just waited for the airline to act. He had been proactive. "I told Mr. Chen that the Etheria partnership is secure," Xavier explained, "but with one new condition, one that is non-negotiable." He looked Cynthia straight in the eye, his CEO persona fully present. "Transcontinental will partner with an independent third-party diversity and inclusion consultancy. I gave him a list of 3 of the best in the country to design and implement a mandatory top-to-bottom bias and sensitivity training program. Not a 2-hour webinar, but an immersive, ongoing program for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the board of directors. Etheria will even cover the first year's costs as a sign of good faith. But your airline will be subject to a yearly audit, and the results will be made public." From the bed, Daniel Patterson let out a low chuckle of pure admiration. Cynthia Davies was stunned into silence. This was not the response of a disgruntled customer. This was the move of a strategic partner. He wasn't asking for compensation. He was demanding reformation. He was leveraging a $700 million contract, not for revenge, but for progress. We accept, of course," Cynthia finally said, humbled. "That's an incredibly constructive proposal, Mr. Stone." "It's the only proposal that matters," Xavier replied. "I don't want a flight attendant to be nice to me because she recognizes my face or my badge. I want her to be respectful to the next person who looks like me or doesn't look like her, because it is the core of her training and the culture of your company. That's the only apology I'm interested in." He had turned a moment of personal humiliation into an instrument for widespread institutional change. He had ensured that the karma that hit Brenda Jenkins wouldn't just be a singular event, but the start of a ripple effect that could potentially protect thousands of future travelers from suffering the same indignity. It was a masterstroke, played not with anger, but with wisdom, the very wisdom Daniel had spent a lifetime teaching him. 6 months passed, and the world spun on. The chill of the Bay Area winter had begun its slow, grudging retreat in the face of a determined spring. At Etheria Innovations, the Aethelred merger was a landmark deal that solidified the company's dominance. For Xavier Stone, however, the victory felt distant. 3 months prior, he had stood on a wind-swept hill overlooking the Pacific and said a final goodbye to Daniel Patterson. The gaping hole left by his mentor's absence was a quiet, constant ache. In the silence, Daniel's words echoed more loudly than ever. Power is useless if you don't use it to recalibrate the world. That recalibration was happening far beyond his own office walls. At Transcontinental Air, the Altitude Initiative was in full swing. It was not the gentle checkbox diversity training many had expected. It was an uncomfortable, immersive, and mandatory reckoning. Captain Robert Miller found himself in a sterile conference room at a T-Sion training facility, nursing a bad cup of coffee and a healthy dose of skepticism. He and 30 other senior pilots and pursers were on day 2 of the new training. He'd seen a dozen of these programs over his 30-year career. They were usually corporate fluff designed to placate HR. The facilitator, a sharp woman from the consulting firm Xavier had recommended, put up a slide. Scenario 3. the implicit judgment. The scenario described a high-status passenger dressed in casual attire being denied an upgrade by a senior crew member. The upgrade was then given to a lower-status passenger in a business suit. A collective murmur went through the room. It was an open secret among the flight crews that this was the stone incident that had started this whole firestorm. One veteran purser scoffed. "Come on, we have to make snap judgments 100 times a flight. Someone in a suit just presents as less of a potential issue than someone in a hoodie. That's not bias, that's experience." Captain Miller, who had remained silent until now, felt a prickle of annoyance. He had seen Xavier Stone's quiet dignity firsthand. He had witnessed the fallout. He stood up, his tall frame commanding the room's attention. "With all due respect, Diane, that's garbage," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of the flight deck. "I was the captain on that flight. The man in the hoodie was a CEO whose company is now the bedrock of our entire digital operation. The man in the suit was a mid-level salesman. The experience you're talking about is a liability. It almost cost us hundreds of millions of dollars. It cost a 22-year veteran her career. If this training can stop even one of you from making that same billion-dollar mistake in judgment, then I suggest you put down your phones and pay attention." The room went dead silent. The facilitator gave him a grateful nod. In that moment, the training ceased to be corporate fluff and became a survival lesson. Captain Miller had become an unwitting but powerful champion for the change, and his voice, respected and trusted, helped turn the tide of cultural resistance. The ripples were spreading. The experience had also changed Xavier. In a product strategy meeting for a new logistics platform, a young, brilliant engineer was presenting a user interface. "The standard flow is optimized for English," the engineer said. "Other languages are supported through a menu. It's an edge case, a small percentage of our user base." Xavier, who had been listening silently at the head of the table, spoke up. "What's the edge case percentage?" "About 12% globally," the engineer replied. 12%, Xavier repeated softly. "Our projections put that at roughly 1.5 million people in the first year alone. They aren't an edge case, Michael. They're a city of people trying to use our product. Redesign the landing page. Make language selection the first, simplest choice a user makes. I want someone in Seoul or São Paulo to feel like this was designed for them, not like they're an afterthought." He looked around the table. "Empathy is not a feature. It is the foundation. Don't ever forget that." The lesson of Flight 217 had permeated his own company's DNA. Meanwhile, in a quiet suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, Brenda Jenkins was living a life she no longer recognized. Her world had shrunk from international destinations to the beige-colored walls of a local community center, where she worked as an office administrator. The pay was a fraction of her old salary, but the humility was total. One afternoon, she was filing paperwork when she overheard a tense conversation at the front desk. A teenage boy, maybe 16, with dark skin and a nervous energy, was trying to sign up for their Coding for Kids volunteer program. The center's volunteer coordinator, a stern woman named Carol, was giving him the 3rd degree. "Why do you want to volunteer?" Carol asked, her tone thick with suspicion. "Is this for school credit court ordered?" "No, ma'am," the boy said, looking at his shoes. I like computers. I want to learn." "We have a lot of expensive equipment here," Carol said, eyeing his baggy jeans and worn t-shirt. "We need people who are responsible." Brenda felt a sickening sense of déjà vu. The condescending tone, the look of instant judgment, the unspoken assumption that this kid didn't belong. It was a perfect, horrifying echo of herself on that airplane. Her heart hammered in her chest. The old Brenda would have ignored it, would have agreed with Carol's assessment. But that Brenda was gone, burned away by public humiliation and months of lonely self-reflection. She stood up and walked to the desk. "Carol," she said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "I can handle this one. Why don't you take your lunch break?" Carol, surprised, shrugged and left. Brenda turned to the boy, giving him a small, genuine smile. "I'm Brenda. I'm sorry about that. Tell me your name. Tell me what you want to learn." The boy, whose name was Jamal, lit up. He spoke passionately about building websites and his dream of designing video games. He was bright, articulate, and full of potential. Brenda signed him up on the spot and promised to introduce him to the instructor personally. That evening, sitting in her small apartment, the full weight of her past actions crashed down on her. She finally understood. It wasn't about the clothes or the seat or the rules. It was about the dignity you afford or deny another human being. With tears streaming down her face, she took out a pen and paper and began to write. A week later, Cynthia Davies was in Xavier Stone's office, presenting a sleek report bound in transcontinental blue. "The numbers are compelling, Mr. Stone," she said, pointing to a graph showing a 30% jump in customer satisfaction scores among minority business travelers. "The Altitude Initiative is working. Anecdotally, the culture is shifting. The legend of the Platinum Partner, as they call it, is now part of our onboarding for all new hires. A story about why assumptions are the most dangerous baggage we carry." Xavier listened, nodding slowly. When she was finished, he didn't comment on the report. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. Brenda's letter. "I received this last week," he said. He read a passage aloud. "You cost me my job, but I think you may have saved my soul. I am learning to listen more and assume less. It's a start." He placed the letter on the table between them. "Your initiative is working from the top down, Cynthia. This letter proves it's also working from the bottom up, even for those who have left. The most powerful stories of change come from those who have been through the fire." He leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to rehire her, but I am suggesting that Transcontinental has a unique asset. You have a former employee who has lived the consequences of bias and come out the other side with genuine remorse and understanding. Perhaps down the road, her story told in her own words could be the most effective part of your entire initiative." Cynthia Davies stared at the letter, then at Xavier, her expression one of profound respect. The thought had never occurred to her. It was audacious, brilliant, and deeply humane. "I will take that to Mr. Chen," she said, her voice filled with a new sense of possibility. After she left, Xavier walked to the panoramic window of his office. He thought of Daniel. He had used his power. He hadn't just demanded karma. He had architected a system for change. The world had been recalibrated just a little, and in the process, a career had ended, a company had been transformed, a soul had been stirred, and a legacy had been honored. The ripples continued to spread. Xavier Stone's story is a powerful reminder that looks can be deceiving, and that true power lies not in status, but in how you use it to lift others up. He could have chosen revenge content with one person's downfall. Instead, he chose reformation, leveraging his influence to create lasting change for thousands of people he would never meet. This wasn't just about getting a seat. It was about making a stand. It shows that one person armed with principle and purpose can force an entire corporation to confront its flaws and become better. If this story of quiet strength and profound karma resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support for accountability and positive change. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life story of justice. What did you think of Xavier's final decision? Was Brenda's fate fair? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.